blindsight is a very important paradigm. I think if people understand blindsight, the whole field, the world will be a better place already. I think many people just don't get the point.
Really? So what's the point?
It's just that subjective and objective measures of perception dissociate, which is a point that has been neglected or written off in a high-profile paper in 2016 in Nature.
Right. They said if you did it right, then they would be
judiciously. I like the argument, yeah, judiciously. So that by that argument, the discovery of patient DF, Miller and Goodale, Weisskranz, all these people are not judicious. That's why they discover all these stuff. All these textbook stuff is not judicious.
If only they had been careful, Hakwan. I mean, come on, then we'd know.
No, but you take that argument. But that argument says subjective and objective measures of perception should be in concordance with each other if they apply judiciously. So, but I think, did I make a logical error there? You can catch me. Like, so by that argument, that must mean that those people who reported dissociation in those classic textbook cases are not judicious.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. 100%. I find it just frankly ridiculous that anyone can say that in anywhere in print, something like that. But it's sad, and so people do miss the point. You see, like, despite all these decades of classic neuropsychology results, people miss the point. People don't get the subjective and objective measures. Namely, objective meaning ability to do forced choice tasks. Subjective, namely the subjective reports of phenomenology or confidence or something like that. People don't get that they can dissociate.
So can I ask you just like a personal question about your history? Do I interpret it correctly that when you were young and when you were when you first kind of learned about blindsight, did you think that sort of, in your mind, was the evidence that is evidence for a first order theory, and then you tried to test it and you found prefrontal stuff and that convinced you, or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, that part of history is somewhat convoluted. I think when I was in undergrad, I wrote my undergraduate thesis on higher order theory. So I always knew what higher order theory is, and then when I went about testing it, back then, it wasn't so clear what I was testing. I think back then, yeah, that's right. Back then, I was more trying to shoot down global workspace theory. I wasn't trying to compare first order and higher order. I wasn't so sophisticated to compare theories yet. I was like a graduate student, a young postdoc. And I was just trying to shoot down global workspace because by temperament, I'm contrarian.
But by global workspace theory, really what you had in mind is like frontal involvement, right? Yeah.
I thought that stand to end at that time, global workspace, we talk about circa 2004, 2005. So global workspace was really dominating. I think it's still dominating, but it was dominating. So I was just trying to shoot it down. That's my approach back then. I thought you take the biggest theory and try to find flaws and try to, look for errors in the perspective.
I thought it was more than that, though, that you just thought.
So I thought that if you control, if you do the. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was a little bit more. I thought that you thought that if people understood blindsight, then they would sort of reject global workspace theory.
Yeah, basically. No, I think it came after. It was experiment first, and then the experiment was the 2006 paper, the PNS paper, which wasn't very good, but the result somehow held up, or maybe it's not somehow. I mean, if it didn't hold up,
wait. You think the 2006 paper is not very good? This is the relative blindsight paper.
Very, very poor. I mean,
even so, not because of the kinds of criticisms that have come about who you exclude from your study and underpowered studies, not because of those kinds of criticisms, right?
I don't think there's a lot of criticism. No, that's a different one. So you talk about the TMS paper.
Yeah.
That paper is just bad because I was a beginner vision scientist. I wasn't in the vision lab. I was in Dick Passingham's lab, who Dick really wasn't very interested in vision, but he gave me the freedom to do that.
Oh, right. I always forget these are two different papers. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
I know that is kind of amazing that he just let you do whatever you want. That's really cool of that guy to do.
Yeah, I'm eternally grateful. But there's a bit of history to that because Larry Weisskranz, who coined the term blindsight, just passed away this year. And there's a bit of history that nobody really, I mean, people told me, but it was not talked about a lot. So Dick Passingham was also a postdoc in Larry Weisskranz's lab.
Mm.
So Larry Weisskranz had a grant on vision, on visual awareness. He was the Blindsight guy, and he took on Dick Passingham as a postdoc when Passingham, all he cared about was prefrontal cortex and action. And in some way, it was never told that way, but I think Dick kind of returned the favor back to the field of visual awareness by having me do a postdoc in his lab doing visual awareness. So there's a bit of twist. So in a sense, I am Larry's grand student, but it was a bit weird, twist of the story. Yeah, they were really some of the greatest people, not just in terms of being scientists, they are also great mentors. I think there's a difference between Weisskranz and many other great scientists. It's not just the work he did was great. He left behind a culture of self-critique, of knowing the literature is almost like a moral duty. It's a very serious culture of how to do behavioral neuroscience.
I mean, I never got to meet him, but yeah, from what you've said, and from what I've heard from other people, that's got to be absolutely right. Yeah.
So I was in Dick's lab, and I did the imaging experiment first, trying to do kind of what we call relative blindsight anomals. So that's basically my whole career. You can sum up as I'm just writing footnotes for Larry. Basically, I'm trying to hope that people get the point of blindsight by doing it in large. In groups of subjects, of healthy subjects instead of patients. I did test patients a couple of times, but mostly my work is really try to extend that to healthy volunteers, or neurotypical volunteers. And so from there, when I got the result, then I started thinking more about the argument. So the arguments kind of build up from there.
So when you ran the study and you saw that the prefrontal activity survived the manipulations, why weren't you converted to global workspace theory?
Well, because it wasn't so global. It was like there was only a tiny bit that survived. Most of it didn't. So a lot of it was gone. And so I thought it wasn't so global. I thought, if anything, the prefrontal involvement isn't to broadcast the signal widely. It didn't look very broad. But I might be wrong. Actually, I went back to think about it. I might be wrong. It might be a kind of, there's some fallacy in my reasoning, because with fMRI, you really don't know how far the signal has gone, right? So the varietal stuff has kind of gone down, but you don't say. But at least it's not, when you match performance between the conditions, the signal is much reduced. And then you also think about it, how does global workspace explain blindsight? And then you start thinking, yeah, it doesn't quite add up. You can have an unconscious signal that is just as strong as a conscious signal. If you titrate it, still match them. It's kind of like, then how does it work? Then you have an unconscious kind of backdoor route that can be so powerful. Then the global workspace isn't so global after all, right? I mean, it's like you have your global, but you have another highway that is just as powerful. Then it's more like a dual pathway instead of a global versus local. So I started thinking more about that, and there are other experiments too.